Good evening. In tonight's video, I want to explore what the Galaxy Class Starship may have been designed to be, other than the obvious that it's a starship. This idea was suggested by comments that I've seen in other videos on what the Galaxy Class Starship is. This video is covered under fair use and is allowed for the purpose of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which don't infringe on copyright. Before we move on, I want to say that I am using Alpha Canon and images from Alpha Canon of the Enterprise to make my arguments. And later on, I'm going to speculate on what it is that I think it is after we've disposed of a couple of other ideas that other people have suggested that it is. The first idea is that it's an apartment in space. And there's an argument to be made here. After all, there are families living on board. We see that here, and especially this family living on board, Wonder Child Wesley Crusher and his mother, Dr. Beverly Crusher, who is the chief medical officer on board the Starship Enterprise. So that is a strong point for the fact that it might be an apartment building in space. It also has a gym. High-end apartments probably do have gyms, and it also has short-term guest accommodations. Again, an apartment building could have a short-term guest accommodation arrangement, so that is also a point for it being an apartment in space. But there's a couple of things that go against that. Pretty strong ones, I think. First of all, there's no bar on board, so that is a point against the fact that it's an apartment building in space. The other thing that we briefly touched on is that it has medical facilities and it has doctors who serve full-time and nurses who serve full-time. So I think these two arguments kind of put the nail in the coffin of the idea that it's an apartment in space. It has to be something more than just that. So the other idea is that it's a cruise ship in space. I've seen this put forward, and there is some merit to this argument as well. First of all, the bar is a point in its favor. The fact that it has shops where you can buy souvenirs and gifts and things like that. Also, cruise ships have those shops on board where you can do these things. Here we see Worf deciding what to buy the O'Briens for their wedding. Forgive me, I had to cough there for a minute. One of the other things that it has that makes it a good ideal candidate for it being a cruise ship in space is that it has a barbershop and beauty salon. Here we see Mr. Mott cutting Geordi LaForge's hair. We've also seen him cut Worf's hair and the captain's hair, and we've also seen women having their hair color changed in the beauty shop barber salon. So that's a point in favor of it being a cruise ship in space. So all of these things add up to a pretty good argument for it being a cruise ship in space. But I don't think that that's what it is either. And the reason I don't think that's what it is, I don't think it's a cruise ship, is because of the long-term families living in space. So that points me into a different direction, which then makes me say, well, if it's not an apartment building in space and it's not a cruise ship in space, then what is it? And it has to do with the fact that there are long-term families living on board. And those families have school-age children. Here we see Wunderkind Wesley Crusher doing a science experiment. And here we see school-age children in school. So that points me to something else. And that something else is a starbase. So my thinking is that it's potentially a mobile starbase. At least it could have been designed as a mobile starbase in the Star Trek universe. Now, this starbase is big enough to where the Galaxy Class Starship can enter it. But there are also small star bases, like K7 here in the original series. And just as the cruise ship has shops and bars and guest accommodations, well, so does K7. K7 has a bar, and the bartender also acts as a shopkeeper. In the bottom scene, we see him interacting with the trader Cyrano Jones, buying things like tribbles and glow water and spike and flame gems. And so he buys those things and then sells them to tourists. We also see that in the first episode of Voyager, where Quark is trying to sell something to Harry Kim, which it would have been a wonderful callback if he had tried to sell Harry Kim spike and flame gems, but I guess they missed that one. Also, it has guest accommodations. In the top two scenes, we see Nils Barris and his assistant on the left-hand side. And there's no starship around other than the Enterprise, so there has to be guest accommodations for him and his assistant. And then in the right-hand side, we see the Klingons arrive and invoke shore leave privileges under the Organian Peace Treaty. So, therefore, it could potentially be a starship, but also, more importantly, a mobile starbase. And here we see DS9 with a Galaxy Class Starship docked to it. And so we see that the Galaxy Class ship is rather large compared to the DS9 starbase. So my thinking is that because it has schools and because it has families living on board, that's potentially what it could be. Now, my speculation is this. It was originally designed by Starfleet to be a mobile starbase with smaller starships attached to it, where they could all go forward together. The smaller starships would go out ahead of the Galaxy Class and explore the universe, the galaxy, and because they're so far out, they can't easily get back to a fixed starbase. So they built this mobile starbase for the families to live aboard, and for the officers on the smaller starships to come home to have time with their family. And so that's what I think it might be. And here we see, again, there's a school on board DS9. Now, Keiko O'Brien had to create that school, but that's another thing that a starbase has. And you would think that starbases have those things. You know, in the real world today, in foreign countries where we have military bases, they have things like schools for the children, and they have accommodations for the families, and they have bars, and they have shops, and they have barber shops, and they have beauty salons all on base. So it makes perfect sense to me that that's what this is. Now, a little bit of beta canon, because I couldn't find anything that showed any smaller ships docked to the Galaxy class. I had to pull this up, and this is a starship comparison size. And most of these starships are operating in the 24th century. And we can see here the Galaxy class in the middle, and compare it to things like the Steam Runner or the Akira class. And it's much larger of a starship than those guys are. So the only thing that kind of comes close to it is the Nebula class starship, which is right next to it. But all the other class starships of the 24th century are small enough to where they could potentially be forward projection of exploration or military might, and still be small enough to dock with the Galaxy class, or if not dock with it, at least come back to it and have this family time with the officers who are serving on board the smaller ships. So that's my speculation of what it could be. I think it's the most complete idea of them all. Obviously, I don't think it's an apartment in space. I don't think it's a cruise ship in space. And it all comes back to the idea that there's families serving on board, that there's families living on board. So it makes perfect sense. If you're going to be out there for a long term and you can't easily get your officers and your enlisted crew back to a star base because you're so far away from your star bases, that you might take a star base along with you. And so that's my speculation. If anybody else has any other ideas, I'm very happy to listen. So please comment. Let me know how well you think I'm doing on these videos. I'm still a fledgling channel, so I'm still learning how to do things. One of the things that's been suggested to me is to have additional lighting. So I do have an additional light on my face, and I do have the microphone brought closer to me. So let me know if that helps, if you think that works. So anyway, that's all I have for tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and please like the video, comment on the video. If you haven't already subscribed, please think about subscribing. I know that for me personally, I wouldn't subscribe based on one video alone, but if you like my content, please think about subscribing. So that's it for me, and share the video as well, because that helps me. But that's all. As always, images are courtesy of trekcore.com. And like I say, I hope you all have a great day. Thanks for taking the time.